Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're looking at a legal framework where the ultimate power doesn't actually rest with a judge, but with everyday people. We're exploring a very specific legal and philosophical structure outlined in our source materials, known as the American State National Common Law System. We're going to take a documentary-style approach here to understand exactly how these trial juries are structured, the history behind them, and the frankly immense power they hold over both the facts and the law according to this ideology. Okay, let's dive right in.
Here's our roadmap. We'll be systematically covering 1. Defining the trial jury. 2. Trial versus grand juries. 3. Qualifications and core responsibilities. 4. Evidence and witness testimony. 5. Deliberations and final verdicts. And finally, 6. Accountability and summary. Let's keep it moving.
Section 1. Defining the trial jury, the supreme authority. To really get a grasp on this framework, we kind of have to completely shift our standard understanding of courtroom dynamics.
The sources sum this whole idea up with a pretty fascinating quote. It says, "In our courts, the jury is still king. The people decide the facts and the law." In a lot of modern courtrooms, you'd totally expect a judge to interpret the law while the jury just decides the facts, right? Well, not here. Here, the jury decides both. They operate as the ultimate, independent tribunal. The text really emphasizes that the jury absolutely does not leave the interpretation of the law to a magistrate or a judge. That power rests entirely with the people sitting right there in the jury box.
Now, this supreme authority isn't framed as some radical new invention out of left field. Actually, the sources root this in deep ancient history, basing it directly on the law of Moses, specifically the Ten Commandments, and a really strict adherence to constitutional due process. It's basically framed as a return to an original, fundamental system where everyday people, rather than legal scholars or bureaucrats, are the ones trusted to execute justice for their own community.
Moving to Section 2, Trial versus Grand Juries, Distinct Roles in the Jural Assembly.
Since we're assuming you're already familiar with the basic concept of assemblies and grand juries, let's look at the strict division of labor here. Grand juries are purely investigative, right? According to the texts, they hear the allegations, decide if there is sufficient cause, and issue indictments. But they don't decide guilt. Trial juries, on the other hand, step in to hear specific, unique cases. They're the ones who listen to the evidence, judge the law and the facts, and issue the final binding verdicts. One initiates the process, the other finishes it.
All right, Section 3. Qualifications and core responsibilities. Basically, who actually wields this power?
With such incredible power over the law, the sources outline some very strict requirements and a thorough vetting process for anyone sitting on these juries. To be eligible, you must be an American state national or state citizen, typically between 21 and 80 years old. But here's the biggest disqualifier: dual citizenship. In this framework, you absolutely must have formally expatriated from what the sources call federal citizenship, or U.S. citizenship, which they view as a foreign corporate status. Anyone with conflicts of interest, or outside that age bracket, is generally excused. The jury pool is formed exclusively by people operating strictly on that land and soil jurisdiction.
Okay, so once they're seated, what's their actual job? According to the texts, juries are composed of the people, and their core duty is to protect their community by enforcing the public and organic law. But notice what's missing here. They are explicitly not there to enforce statutory codes, administrative regulations, or corporate public policies. Their only metric is the fundamental law of the land and protecting inherent rights.
Section 4, Evidence and Witness Testimony. Let's step inside the courtroom.
How does a trial actually run in this common law setting? Well, the source material lays out a super clear, step-by-step courtroom process. Step 1, the claimants go first. They hold the absolute burden of proof. They have to present recorded facts and evidence showing actual identifiable harm or trespass. Remember, under this system, there is no such thing as a victimless crime. Someone literally has to stand up and claim injury. Step 2, witnesses testify for the claimants. And finally, Step 3, the accused gets to floor to provide their testimony, explain their side, and bring in their own witnesses.
Now, here's a crucial point. What is the justice or the magistrate doing during all this? In this framework, they're basically just a referee. They ensure a level playing field, adhere to fair rules of evidence, and keep the proceedings in order under due process. But importantly, they do not rule on the facts, and they do not interpret the law. They don't even have to be lawyers. They're just respected community members trusted to manage a fair hearing.
Which brings us to Section 5, Deliberations and Final Verdicts, Reaching a Decision. Let's look at what happens behind closed doors.
Once the evidence wraps up, the trial moves into what the sources call the living court jury room. And this process is highly structured. It's monitored by a figure called the bondsman. Their job is to be a protector, making sure the room is secure and that the jury has access to all the evidence without any outside interference. Inside, a jury lead takes charge to keep order and make sure everyone gets a chance to speak. They hash out the charges, review the evidence, and establish if an actual harm occurred. And they have to reach a unanimous yay or nay decision.
And because this jury is the supreme authority, their verdict is practically absolute. The sources claim that once a common law jury makes a unanimous decision, it cannot be appealed or overturned by a higher court. No way! The justice literally just reads the pronouncement. The only exception mentioned in the text is if substantial new evidence comes to light that would have totally changed the jury's reasoning. Other than that, their word is final.
Now, this brings us to what is arguably the most powerful concept in this whole framework: jury nullification. Think about that, having the power to literally erase a law you thought was unjust. The texts state that an American jury has the unequivocal right to directly strike down, rewrite, or reject legislation they deem unfair, impractical, or void for vagueness. This is where everyday people get to enforce their will on the entire system. If they find a law unjust, they can just nullify it as if it never existed.
Section 6. Accountability and Summary. The ultimate check. Let's zoom out for a second. How does this system enforce accountability on a broader scale? Well, the texts use a pretty heavy maxim to illustrate the foundation here. The voice of the people is the voice of God. This really highlights why the trial jury is viewed as the ultimate accountability mechanism. By putting the final say over both facts and law directly into the hands of an independent jury of peers, the whole system is designed to be an impenetrable check against government overreach and legislative errors.
So, to wrap up today's explainer, let's hit the core takeaways of this specific legal ideology. Trial juries are the absolute supreme authority, competent to decide both facts and the law. They operate entirely independently of the justice or magistrate, who's really just there to referee. They possess the ultimate power of jury nullification to reject unjust laws. And finally, they are formed exclusively by vetted state citizens operating on the land and soil jurisdiction.
The trial jury reviews evidence, hears testimony, deliberates on the facts, and reaches findings based on the evidence presented. But it leaves us with a pretty fascinating question to think about. In a modern society, what really happens when the final interpretation of the law is taken away from the judges and placed entirely into the hands of the people? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. See you next time.